Welcome
Yeah.
to Glasp Talk. And okay, today we have amazing guest speaker, Fernando Borretti. So he's a software engineer and writer with over a decade of experience. And some people know him about, his programming language like Austral.
Yeah.
And or like, he wrote about like effective space repetition, unbundling tool of sorts, and so on. So today we'd like to ask him about, his internal drive and motivations and also productivity tips. And also maybe we could tap onto like how he manages knowledge and also synthesize knowledge and so on.
Yeah.
And as because he writes blog and fictions and so on. So yeah. So Fernando, welcome to Grass Talk.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So yeah, I briefly introduced you about you, but could you introduce yourself, to people who don't know you yet?
Yeah. So I'm Fernando. I guess brief life story. I was born in Uruguay, moved to Australia where I've been living since 2019. I worked as a software engineer. Started working professionally like right out of high school, like 2 weeks out of high school. I started writing Python. Did that various Python jobs for most of 10 years, and just I horribly burned out of Python. So now I'm like, thankfully much happier writing backend Rust at a small AI startup. So that's very good. And in my personal life, well, not quite personal life, but in like personal work, I've always worked on various kinds of like software projects, like open source projects. While I was in college, instead of studying for important exams, I was writing like various open source tools. Most used to be in Lisp because I caught the Lisp mind virus, and I started writing Lisp obsessively. That didn't have a big future, let's say, because it's like a very small, isolated community type thing. And yeah, so late in the past few years, branch out a bit more to like, I kind of burned out of static typing, of dynamic typing. So I'm working more on like functional, statically typed languages. The Austral compiler, which you mentioned, that's written in OCaml. That was also a mistake. I think most of my personal projects nowadays are written in Rust because it's like, it has good build tooling and it's like a nice developer experience and it's statically typed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally, yes. And what you said, you started coding since high school, right? And
Yeah.
what made you to start? What intrigued you to write code? And some people love writing code, and some people don't. And
Yeah.
what was your early days? What
Well,
motivated you?
since I was a kid, I wanted to like make games. I think that's a very common origin story. I always wanted to learn how to program, but nobody around me like knew how, and I didn't have the tooling. And we got the internet like quite late, so my first experience of programming was a friend of mine whose father was an electrical engineer, had a CD with like a basic distribution. So I he lent me that and I installed it and I had like a basic interpreter. I don't even remember what it was called. Maybe like Dark Basic or something. No, Liberty Basic it was called. It was a basic interpreter on my terrible Windows XP computer, and that was my first experience of programming. But ever since I was a kid, I wanted to learn to do it. And I started writing my own code personally because I wanted to write a program to write novels in, like Scrivener or something. But I'm a big yak shaver. So it wasn't enough to like, just pick an existing language and write the program. I had to like go down the yak shaving hierarchy, and eventually that led to me writing my own programming language. I think if I had more time, I would probably write my own silicon and my own instruction set architecture. But you have to kind of like decide where the yak shaving ends. So I've yet to write that program for writing novels, but I do have a programming language and a few compilers done. So that's good in a way.
I see. Yeah. And how long have you been building or writing your own programming languages?
Oh God, I hesitate to answer this because it's such a long time. I started writing my own programming languages like I think the oldest one I got up on GitHub was in like 2012. I guess I'm kind of a control freak, and I've always been unhappy with all the languages in various like subtle ways. I'm always trying to build my own. And Austral kind of evolved gradually. I think in 2015-ish, I had this idea of like, let's make a statically typed Lisp with like compile time memory management. And if you dig in the repository history or in my own like intensely disorganized file system, the original version of Austral, it only had the name because I thought the name was cool. It was like a statically typed Lisp with region-based memory management. It was very inspired by Common Lisp, and gradually it evolved step by step. And like circa like 2018, 2019, I got the idea to make like a Pascal / Ada syntax inspired language. And yeah, that's the current latest version of the language, more or less that. It's like syntactically inspired by Ada, semantically inspired by OCaml and Rust and such. And so yeah, it was a lengthy evolution. Most of it, yeah, for many years I worked on it like on and off. This was most of the time I worked on it was like during the nadir of like untreated ADHD. So I would work on it for like a few weeks or months and then run out of steam and then drop it and work on it again. So the question is, how long have I been working on it? I guess the answer is, where's my lawyer? I plead the fifth. Too long.
Thanks. And then, as an open source, I think over time you have collaborated with many people, right? Like developers and so on.
Not quite. I'm less of a collaborator and more like make my own thing and put it out there. I have like sent patches to like other people and collaborated with other people in other projects, but yeah, I'm more of a loner with open source, which is not ideal, but it's more common, I guess, in the common Lisp community where I started writing open source code. It's more common for people to kind of tend their own garden than collaborate. I think this is called like the Lisp curse, or like the curse of the bipolar Lisp programmer, where like the language is so powerful that you don't really need external dependencies. You can kind of build your own garden of little tools and libraries and just kind of live in your own splendid isolation, which is like kind of a credit to the language, but also it's not good for the development of a community. I think Eric Nagum had a point about how like C is such a horrible language and it's so hard to like build anything complicated in C. It forces you to have a community. Or like Python has so many like weird paper cuts and like strange things that you have to get used to. But that paradoxically that helps you to build a community, because you have a set of people who've gone through these trials and tribulations, who know like they've been burned by the semantics of lexical scope in exception frames or whatever the fuck. Yeah, that's like they've gone through this together, and you need a community of people to tell you, oh no, that error message means this.
I see. And then I saw Paul Graham's tweet, Paul Graham PG is also a supporter, not supporter, but he sometimes mentioned about this. Yeah.
Yes, Paul, he used to write a lot of Lisp. I mean, the big startup that he sold in the 90s, that was, I think, the on-ramp to a Y Combinator that was written in Lisp. There was a different time. Arguably, you could get away with Lisp was web scale then because there wasn't much of a web, but nowadays it's kind of far behind like the tech stack, I think. But yeah, Paul Graham actually, he wrote 2 books about Lisp. One is called like ANSI Common Lisp, and one is called On Lisp, and they're really really good. And they like revived my flagging interest in Lisp a while back. Really gorgeous books if you read them.
Yeah, yeah.
See, cheers. I'm just curious, like how many developers are using your programming language? You cannot track.
I can't quite track, but I get more GitHub issues and Discord conversations than I would have expected. So more people are like trying it out. Actually, I got a message from somebody, I think here in Sydney or it was in Australia, who's like using Austral to build, I think, modules for SEL4. SEL4 is it's a microkernel operating system that's been proven to be secure and correct, and it has I think support for like capability-based security, and Austral has support for capability-based security. So somebody was out there trying to integrate the two and build like secure, probably correct software in Austral, which is interesting. If I had more time, but currently work is pretty all-consuming. I kind of want to rewrite the whole compiler in like Rust, because OCaml is like it's not a. There's many difficulties with OCaml.
I see.
And
Interesting.
yeah, at the same time, I'm curious, you were writing code, but at the same time, you were writing blog posts and also fictions. And
Yeah.
how is it possible, And I'm really curious about your writing part and blogging and fictions.
How is it possible in terms of like time management, or in terms of like or in terms of like cognitively, how is it possible to do all of them?
Time management and productivity, time management and knowledge.
Well, I mean, with productivity and time management, if you look at the copyright years of the various projects and the publication years of the posts, I can't really say I'm like a star of like productivity and time management. But I think how can I best answer this? I do have a file of like collected productivity learnings that I can share, but otherwise with time management, it's just like you just have to make the time for like personal projects. I think it's important. I've always valued my free time outside of work to write and to work on code and such. And some things some things you have to like allocate time for them to like, I'm gonna do 3 hours to like write a blog post. But some things they kind of they draw you in, and then it's no longer a question of like time management. It's like, I am writing this post now, and I'm not gonna be distracted by something else, and I finish it in like one big burst of time. I think productivity and time management is something that I struggled with for a long time, and it's only recently that I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I started like a journey of like improving my organizational skills in general. Part of that involved medication, but it wasn't like an overnight thing. But I started, I'm taking stimulants now, so I'm productive. It's actually taken me many years to like learn how to use a to-do list effectively, how to use a calendar effectively, how to manage my time effectively. I have somewhere a file in my personal knowledge base.
Yeah, and I get your unbundling tools of those, and that has a lot of insights, and very good one.
Thank you. I wrote that one because like my white whale is productivity software. I written all these in my personal projects, I've written all these like little wikis and note-taking apps. And again, in college, instead of studying my notes, I was writing like a wiki in Common Lisp to take notes, which is not a productive use of time. But at least I know a lot more about the design space of wikis. That's good. I can say that. But yeah, I've always been interested in this whole area of information architecture. Maybe I was predestined to be a programmer for that reason. I've always been interested in like how you organize information. There's a website called usesthis.com, and the website is about it's just interviews with people about what stack they use. I want there to be something like that, but for like how people organize information. Like, what is your folder hierarchy? What does your Notion setup look like? I wanted that for a long time. Maybe I have to start it because I like taking inspiration from other people and how they organize their things.
Yeah, I'm also interested in how people manage knowledge and information. Yeah, that's really interesting topic. Yeah, that's why we are interviewing people actually, like you. And yeah. And
well, currently my quote unquote process is I use the reminders app from Apple as a to-do list. I use the calendar, also the normal macOS calendar. I use it kind of in a weird way where it's both prospective and retrospective. I use it to like plan stuff, but then I also use it to track time, and I modify the events after the fact to track the time, which is kind of inconvenient because you start the week with these very beautiful symmetrical blocks of time, perfectly planned, and then you end the week and everything's all jumbled up because the actual time that things take always disagrees with what you planned. But that's a matter of just like discipline, right? And actually sticking to the plans that you make. And for notes, I have so many like half-finished like little wikis, and so in my file system there's a bunch of like SQLite databases for all these wikis that I used to have that I yet to merge into the one true wiki. And currently what I have is like I'm actually using Jekyll, the static site generator, as a personal wiki, because it's markdown flat markdown files in the file system, and you can render it to HTML. But gradually, I kind of just stopped using the HTML rendering because I don't really need it for anything other than rendering LaTeX math for math notes. So yeah, now it's just a bunch of markdown files in the file system. And I don't really have a good ontology. It's kind of messy at present. The only thing that's very structured is I do hierarchical reviews. So I will have a page of daily reviews, weekly reviews, monthly reviews, quarterly reviews, and yearly reviews. So every day I just make a new file with the today's timestamp. So it's 2024-06-28. And yeah, I just do write my journal for the day, and then at the end of the week I review the week, and at the end of the month I review the month, and I find it vaguely useful. Especially the daily journal is very freeform, but the higher level reviews are more structured. They're more about answering questions like, broadly speaking, what did I do this month? What did I not do? What went right? What went wrong? What are the reflections, and what are the actions I'll take to improve things? And for organizing information, other than the wiki, I try to centralize everything through having as few inboxes as possible. So when I kind of have a list of things to act on in the to-do list. Anything that's meant to be actionable goes roughly in the to-do list. I used to just bookmark pages. anything that I found like interesting, or if there was a paper I wanted to read, or a book I wanted to read but I didn't have time, I would just bookmark it. Browser bookmarks are really a bad idea. They're the place where information goes to die, because I can't really remember. First of all, they're completely disorganized, or rather, there's like geological strata of organization where, like, this period there was an organization, and this period they had this ontology didn't quite work out, and this period was disorganized again. But I think the problem with bookmarks is like there's another side that's missing to the bookmark, which is like, what was my mental state when I was like looking at this? Like, why did I put this book in the bookmarks? Is it because I want to read it? Is it because it's part of a question that I was trying to answer? Yeah, the bookmarks are kind of a nightmare because they're just not very actionable. I think organizing information by actionability is probably a better idea, like grouping things by project or by a question you want to answer. In a sense, tying the inputs to the outputs so that they actually leave the system at one point. It's probably a good idea. But I'm such a hoarder that I'm too prone to just like collecting things like, oh, here's a paper about the history of spreadsheets. I'll surely get around to reading this someday. Nowadays, I try to say, okay, either this is junk or it goes in a to-do list to be actioned at some point in the future, or I just tweet it out, where it's like putting something on the Twitter timeline is kind of a nice compromise between throwing it out and saving it, because in a sense it's saved. You can go back and search for it, and maybe it's like useful. It's more public, so maybe it's more socially useful to share. But yeah, you don't have the problem with the endlessly growing list of bookmarks that will never be actioned.
Yeah, I think the bookmark are missing context, right? Yeah, we need a context, and as you mentioned, and yeah, that totally makes sense.
I wish I could have something like tree-style browser navigation, where there's like a tree and the parent of a tab. When you have a tab and you open a link, it opens a sub-node of the tree. And then you can just save a whole tree and give it a name. Like, oh, this time I went on a rabbit hole digging all this information up. Close it up, save it, put it away.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if someone is exploring this area, but yeah, interesting. And then also nowadays, AI is kind of trendy, right? People are obsessed with AI, like ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini, and so on. Do you use AI in your workflow? I mean, for coding, maybe yes, or yes or no, but like knowledge management, productivity, time management.
I use Copilot as a code completion tool that's very low level. I use Claude. The latest model, 3.5 Sonnet, is like really good. But for programming, I mostly use it to talk about like kind of like high level architectural decisions. Like, it happens very often that I can implement something in one of two ways, and I need somebody to like soundboard off of. So I'll present it to Claude and put the arguments for and against. And yeah, it's kind of like rubber duck debugging, but at a higher level of abstraction. And I find that useful. I mostly, for AI, for coding, I mostly use it in a very low level way with Copilot, and also in a very high level way with Claude. For productivity and time management and personal life, sometimes I also use Claude as like a soundboard for my own personal life. Like, oh, how do I approach this problem? It's very good for like, I have no common sense, so it's very good for like asking, what would a normal sane person think of something without bothering your own friends? So it's a kind of like calibration tool for common sense, or for like soundboarding personal problems, or like, oh, how can I get better at this, and suggest strategies, and that's been fine. But I don't use any like AI powered productivity tools. I don't think. There are some, like there's a tool called Reclaim.ai, which organizes your calendar with AI, and I haven't used it, but I can't. Maybe if I was busier in like a people sense, it might be useful. But I find it useful to just organize my own calendar, and I don't spend too much time doing that because I don't have that many events that I have to like plan around. And yeah, for the
How
to
about
do.
for writing? How about for writing? Do you use AI for writing?
No, I haven't yet. I think I'm not as against it as some people are in the abstract, but concretely, if I ever ask, like I'll occasionally ask Claude to like draft a reply to an email, and it's just very hard to get the tone right because it always sounds, too preppy, too obsequious, too artificial. Sometimes I'll use it, draft an email, and I'll get like, oh, that's a good sentence, or like I iteratively draft the thing, but ultimately it's in my own tone, and maybe it's like just like one or two sentences that are like from Claude. For writing blog posts, I have the short answer is no. I'm not completely against it, but I'm fairly protective of like my own writing, and I want it to be mine. I have a somewhat systematic process for writing where I will start with like an outline and just elaborate the outline and keep elaborating the outline and just add reorder notes and add sub notes and break it up. And when it's all the details there, then I'll start iteratively transforming it into text. Like, okay, the top level notes become headings, the lower level notes, those get refactored into paragraphs. That's the actual turning of the outline into prose is a surprisingly time-consuming process. It takes a long time, and you might think, oh, this is like the obvious use case for something like Claude or ChatGPT to just transform this outline into prose, but it never comes out quite right. The tone, the weighing of the sentences. Yeah, I think I can probably do better for now, but I'm open to the possibility that will change in the future. Actually, like, yeah, in 2022, I was trying to get this short story / novella out the door, and one reason I was like rushing to get it done is because I thought pretty soon AI could be a superhuman prose stylist. So you can give it a few bullet points, and it's gonna give you, writing that's like Nobel Prize winning, just beautiful lyrical writing that just brings you to tears. And so I have to finish this before in the short window while human art is still a viable thing. That has not been the case yet. Maybe the base models before RLHF are better for creative writing, but nobody releases those. And after it's gone through RLHF, it's so hard to get ChatGPT or Claude to like write with the tone that I want. It's actually quite interesting because when you ask ChatGPT or Claude to write something in the style of, H.P. Lovecraft or Ernest Hemingway or whatever writer, when you ask it to do style transfer, it writes, it's kind of like access in a space. It writes with their style, but it's unmistakably written by ChatGPT or Claude. Like, on all of the axes, it's like Hemingway or like whoever you ask, but there's one axis where it's just fixed in the ChatGPT like world. I don't know what you call that axis, like preppiness or something like that, but it's whenever you do style transfer with an LLM, it always comes out like, yeah, it's Lovecraft written by ChatGPT. It's Hemingway written by ChatGPT. It's Stendhal written by ChatGPT. And that signature is just so unmistakable, and it's kind of annoying.
And have you used the memory function from ChatGPT? They memorize your conversation and learn your taste, tone.
I haven't used the memory yet. I like having each conversation be ephemeral. I haven't used the Claude projects feature yet, where you can share like prompts across conversations. I'm fairly low touch with these things. I very rarely change the system prompt or specify too many other things. I'll just put it in the request, keep it short or something of that nature.
I see. Yeah, I often ask, keep it short, device or something. Yeah, that makes sense. And
Yeah.
And since you're a software engineer and you understand how programming, works and AI works, I think a little bit. So have you found the advantage, unfair advantage as a software engineer, in writing as a writer? Because you understand technology, and does that help you write something or as a writer or fiction?
Well, I think most of my writing is about tech. So yeah, like knowing the details. I think in tech, the details matter to an almost uncanny degree. So many times in tech, in like writing code, I have this perfect plan, and it's derailed by like the slightest detail. Like, one row in the database is wrong, and that means the entire schema migration is no longer possible. Things of that nature. So the details matter. So understanding the details helps when you're like a tech blogger. And for fiction, I don't know. I think the fiction that I write has a lot of like technical detail and a lot of references to computing and the history of computing, and those you can't do that unless it comes from a place of first knowledge and also like genuine love for the subject, where you can turn something that's like a quotidian thing that you work with every day into something a little bit magical, maybe. Does that answer the question at all?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah. No worries. Yeah.
Okay. I thought it was starting to rumble at the end.
But it's a different type of question. But so when you start thinking about writing, so like fiction, so what do you start with at first? You think like character at first, or story at first, or like the ending at first. How do you start writing it?
Well, that's interesting. It's less like a blog post. With technical blog posts, as I mentioned before, I'm very systematic. I start with the bullet points and recursively expand them and turn it into text. With fiction, it's different. There's usually, it's like a process of accretion or nucleation, where something appears in my mind, and it's usually first like a word, and then it's a sentence, and this is over an extended period of time, and then it's like a paragraph, and then it's like this mental imagery of like a scene of some particular thing, and then it's tied to some abstract idea of like what the story should be, and usually the idea is like very vague. A group of explorers petition a deity, a group of people explore the ruins of a dead god, and just scenes and images start appearing, and they accrete like around these very small things, little layers stories start accreting, and you end up with like a necklace of these little pearls of scenes and bits and paragraphs and sentences and ideas and story fragments in a very vague sense. And the writing process, the fiction writing process for me is kind of weirdly physical. I just kind of pace my room, and ideas come up in my head, and I create, and occasionally I'll sit down and like write something down very quickly and go back to obsessively pacing the room and generating more ideas. It's kind of like a dynamo. You have to turn in the physical world to get the gears inside turning. And when enough has accreted, you just kind of write the connective tissue, and that's a story. So very unsystematic, woefully unproductive. It took me like most of a year to write less than about 25,000 words, for example, which is like not an ideal pace, not good at all. But I don't know, some things take time.
Interesting. And so when do you think, I mean, how long does it take to write a fiction? So for example, like 2050 words or something like that. And when do you think it's ready to publish?
How long does it take? I think I could probably go faster now, but back then, when I was doing this more actively in like 2021 and 2022, I would say, yeah, maybe a few thousand words a month. Very far from what you might need to like finish like a full-length novel. And how do you know it's ready to publish? That's
difficult question.
Yeah,
Because not sure, but so I can imagine like like novelist or fictionist like the story, but so later on, so and looking back into the story you liked, then I want to change the story, so again and start writing again or something like that.
Well,
so
I mean, I think it's done. I think for me it's like it's ready to publish when I'm like so physically sick of like reviewing it that the thought of like reading it over from the beginning is just like physically repulsive. So I'm like, well, I can't review anymore. Let's just hit publish. I mean, maybe in a few months, GPT-5 will be able to like make this from like a few bullet points in a second to like much greater quality and internal coherence and characterization. So like, let's publish while humans can still make art. Jorge Luis Borges had some quote about how like if you don't publish, it's just an eternal draft that you're gonna review forever. And I have some, there's like a couple of things where I occasionally think, oh, actually, this scene I should rewrite this. I should change this. I should change this word because the rhythm doesn't quite flow. But I've so far not done that because it's just so annoying because it just never ends. So you kind of have to accept. Well, you don't. I reserve the right to go back and change things years after the fact. But to some extent, you kind of have to accept. No, this is how it is, and it's a work of art is kind of like a point in time. So if you keep revising it, it's changing because you're not the same person who wrote it, right? This is a problem with like really long form art, like web comics or web novels that go on for a long time, like a decade plus in the making, where it's like, well, the author changes so much during the process of writing that the internal coherence of the story starts to fail because they change as a person. So like, the world building starts to change, the character, the nature and motivations of the character starts to change, and things start derailing because it's the author who's changing.
I see. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I respect so because I have no talent or sense so in writing fiction. So yeah, inspiration wise, so like storytelling wise, so it's so yeah, respectful. So
And and at the same time, do you think setting a deadline helps? Some people use, this method like, oh, until this day, we gotta get things done, So anything, if it's unfinished, whatever, we gotta finish it, publish it. And do you believe in that method or way to do something?
I become like a lot better at managing time and a lot more disciplined, but I'm not yet at the point where I can set arbitrary, realistic deadlines and actually commit to them for most, especially for creative things. I think deadlines are best for things that you procrastinate on for essentially emotional reasons, like, I have to get this paperwork done. Well, there's nothing physically preventing you from doing it earlier. So forcing yourself in various ways, publicly committing to a deadline can be useful. But for a creative work, I don't know. I think maybe a more experienced or more talented writer would be able to approach the writing process more systematically and set deadlines and milestones and actually keep them and say, okay, like for this week or for Q1, we're going to write the following scenes, or we're going to get the novel to like 75% done. But at my skill level, I don't think it's possible to force creative work to fit a deadline, because so little of it is actually me writing in a systematic way, and so much of it is just turning the crank and waiting for a new idea to fall out, which has a variable timeline.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Yes. And so I'm a software engineer. Some people in our audience are many writers and aspiring writers, and some people software engineer wanna be a writer or something. And but as I'm coding, I often forget, or it's hard for me to publish something, right? When I'm coding, because coding is kind of writing, and so I sometimes I can't have time to set a time to write a blog post or something. And how w- how would you encourage? I mean, how would you encourage software engineers to publish more or share more while coding or become writer?
Well, I'll say a couple of things. One is that I often thought, oh, this blog post is so mediocre. This is like not even good. I wrote this in an afternoon. It's vague. And then I'll publish it, and a lot of people love it, and they tell me, "Oh, I've been thinking about all these things. You nailed this one thing I had been trying to put to words, but never could. It's actually really valuable." And the amount of effort that I put into the post is often uncorrelated with like the reception of it. So one way would be to like share drafts privately with friends, not in the with the objective of like, oh, please, like, let me know if there's like typos, but rather with the objective of, is this valuable to you? Is this interesting? Could this be interesting to somebody? Another thing is, I I have found it useful to set a kind of rule that when I do something, I write about it in some way, and maybe it doesn't deserve a blog post, but at least like a Twitter thread, because there's so many little ad hoc things that I do that have to do with tech. I'll write like a little Python script to do this one little task, or I'll go on this rabbit hole of research, reading about this or that topic. And if something isn't published or doesn't lead to some external outcome, it's kind of like it didn't happen. It's so having a kind of rule that like by default things should be public. If you do something, write about it. Then it's not like then it wasn't a waste of time. It's actually potentially socially useful. Of course, you have to have like some filter for quality. But in my experience, one thing that could be encouraging is that I often will find somebody, on Twitter or GitHub or through their blog, and think, oh, this person is like really interesting. I really resonate with like what they're thinking and talking about. I want to see more of this person, and I go on their blog, and there's like 3 blog posts, and one of them is an apology for not blogging often enough. And like I have never wished. I've never really wished for somebody to write less. I've never thought, oh, this is too much. I don't need to know. I don't need to read this post. Mostly, when I run into somebody that I think is interesting, I wish they would write more and share more of themselves, because I'm curious about them, and I want to know. Oh, yeah, of course I want to know how you organize, the files in your file system. That's super worthwhile. Like, but I think a lot of people would write about that but they think, oh, who would care? Like, who wants to know about like this little detail of little old me? So yeah, that's what I would say is like public by default. Don't be a perfectionist. And often people want you to share more of yourself.
Yeah, totally. Yes, that totally resonates with what we do at Glasp. We want people share more about what they are reading, managing something information, and so on. Yeah. And also, this is a last question, but as a Grasp is a platform where people can share what they are reading, learning, and as their digital legacy. That's what we see. And what kind of legacy or impact do you want to leave behind, or for the future generations through your life?
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's a question I don't think about often. I think I mentioned earlier, I think to modern people, the idea of like leaving a legacy or having a legacy to take care of it seems almost kind of archaic or like old-fashioned. What do you mean? I'm here to to watch Netflix and scroll Twitter, and then I just pass the time. Well, it's very vague and it's a very safe answer. I like to leave behind a trail of beautiful things, and they could be software objects or fiction writing or non-fiction writing, at least. Yeah, it is a hard question to answer because it requires you to confront a number of things. One is mortality, and the other is like, what are you actually doing with your life, and is it worthwhile? And so many people spend their lives doing things that, if they thought through it. I saw a great tweet about this the other day. What did it say? Like, yeah, people spend their lives pursuing things that don't stand up to even 30 seconds of scrutiny. So creating beautiful artifacts, but that's a very safe answer.
But that's a great answer. Yeah, I think yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for joining today, and we really had a great conversation today. Yeah. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. It's my privilege.
Thank you.